it's a challenging time, you know. And you're in a good position to be able to have a real major effect and so forth at a time when it's needed. You know?
I almost think I'm in a better position now than I would have been if I'd gotten elected.
Really? You know, well, because because you got a national purview now.
That's right.
And you got that, yeah, okay. Welcome very, very much to Conversations. I'm pleased to welcome to the program Audrey Rowe. And Audrey Rowe is Executive Vice President of the National Urban League. And Audrey, welcome very, very much to Conversations and to Manhattan Neighborhood Network.
Great. Glad to be here.
Wonder if it is. You've had an illustrious career we want to talk about, and you're also with a very illustrious organization, the National Urban League. And we'll start with the National Urban League. Maybe you could share with us and the audience, it goes back now 86 years.
85 years. It's coming
who started it? What happened? Where does it fit in?
The National Urban League was started as an organization to bring together individuals who wanted to work on the civil rights, equal opportunity for African Americans in this country. Way back, 85 years ago, some very visionary and forward-thinking people brought together a group of individuals and started the organization, and over that period of time it's just continued to grow until we have 113 affiliates throughout the country. Most of the urban leagues are engaged in service delivery, so some of them operate employment and training programs, child care centers, economic development programs, a whole range of social services kinds of programs, tutorials, etc. And they differ from geographic location to geographic location depending on what the major needs are. All of them have a board of directors that is made up of prominent citizens, usually business persons, elected officials, appointed officials, who help to shape the agenda of that locale.
Locally.
Locally, and at the national board we have a board of very prominent CEOs and other community leaders who are part of our, who govern us through our national board.
So you've been able to have a considerable amount of people with national attention, national reputations attend to that, and from the corporate community, a considerable amount.
Absolutely, and we've had, I mean, the presidents that we've had over the years, Vernon Jordan was the president of the Urban League.
Say no more.
Ron Brown headed our Washington office. We've had Whitney Young, John Jacobson, now most recently Hugh Price.
Yeah, Hugh Price just taken over about a year ago now, right?
That's right.
Wish him well, and may he have a good and rich tenure like the people that have preceded him. It's been part of the fabric of the civil rights and equal justice community in this country. There have been others, NAACP, there's been the work of Mr. King, SNCC, a whole bunch of different things. The Urban League has been able to have the attention of a good deal of both. You've been particularly concerned with Afro-American concerns, but you've been having a great deal of cooperation from corporate CEOs that are not directly of that community. And there's been a lot of cultural, cross-cultural.
And part of it is because our emphasis over the years has focused on equal employment opportunities. We've run job centers. A lot of our affiliates in the very early days ran job centers. That's where you went to find a job, whether you were graduating from high school or in college or just moving into a community or just looking for employment. You went to the Urban League because you could find out about a job and have training. So corporate CEOs and business persons wanted to be a part of it because we were providing some of the workforce that they would hire and a lot of the training that was going to be necessary. I mean, they saw it as a worthwhile investment both of their time and of their resources. And so that community we had pretty much carved out as the community that we work very closely with.
It was in their interest.
And it was in their interest. And it continues to be.
Is it fair to say that the people, there's different kinds of people. We have people, is it fair to say that a number of the people who came through the Urban League programs and so forth were people that would be aimed for executive positions, or
No.
or is it all levels of society?
All levels of society, all levels of position. I was talking to an aunt of mine just the other day, and we were talking about the Urban League, and she said, I never told you this, but I got my first job through the Urban League.
There you go.
And at that point, she went in as a nurse's assistant, because that was the positions that they had available. And so people have gone in for a full range of jobs that the Urban League has been very successful. And each year at our national conferences, we have a huge job fair. And corporations come and businesses come and individuals come with their resume. It's a job showcase, and you will have several hundred people who will come seeking employment.
Right, seeking employment, and again, at all levels,
At all levels.
And then you also keep your eye open for general questions of civil rights and safeguarding civil rights and the general advancement of the whole community.
Absolutely. I mean, you're always, you focus on economic opportunity, self-sufficiency, independence, whatever one wants to call it, in seeking that public policy promotes and creates opportunities for people. That we're very much concerned about affirmative action and equal opportunity and everything that's happening in those areas, sort of the racial inclusion focus of our work. And we've always been involved with youth at some level. There's been a range of youth programs where they're now much more in focus because Mr. Price has taken a very keen interest in focusing a lot of our energy in the area on youth, but we've had a great deal of youth programs. Our Springfield chapter runs for many people who, I know even when I was growing up, who attended a camp that was a place where African Americans went for camp called Camp Atwater in Springfield. Our Springfield Urban League operates that facility.
Springfield, Mass? Yeah, right.
Yeah. So we have...
that's an interesting area.
It is a very interesting area. When I grew up, I grew up in New York.
Oh, you did?
And I grew up in Coronies-Delmhurst. And my friends all went to Camp Atwater. I mean, that was the camp for African Americans to attend. So the Urban League operates that kind of a program. At the same time, we have programs operate in public housing developments that focus on tenant management and that focus on youth development in those locations. So it's a wide range of programs.
And they have the New York Urban League, they have Illinois Urban League, and so on. Then they have the National Urban League.
That's right.
And you're located in New York. You're not located in Washington.
No. We have a Washington
New York,
office.
and why not in Washington with so much public policy concern and so forth? Isn't it something natural that you join all the rest of the people in the stampede to the Potomac?
It's probably that you're better out of the middle of the Beltway.
Maybe you
don't have the Beltway mentality that everyone seems to exhibit that resides there. No, we had an opportunity. We were given a building. And so we own property.
That's an important consideration in New York. Yes, it is.
That is one of the reasons why we remain located here, even though other groups, the NAACP has left. Some of the other groups have left and relocated. We have chosen, United Negro College Fund, we have chosen to remain.
Good. Well, I'm glad you are, and glad that you're here in New York. And this is still the economic and many ways cultural hub of the country, despite what all those Washingtonians might say, right? Now, the Urban League, good. Well, 86 years and going strong and getting strong all the time, and bless them and everything. Now, yourself, you're Executive Vice President, you're number 2 to Mr. Price now, as I understand there. But your own background a little bit. I understand you went to the Kennedy School, but maybe you can share your own background. You've also had some interesting political development that went on up in Connecticut.
That's right.
So maybe you can share a little of your own background.
Well, as I said, I'm a New Yorker by birth. My dad still lives here, and now I've relocated, and my daughter's relocated. So I'm coming back home in one sense. But I've just recently left the state of Connecticut, where I joined Governor Weicker as his commissioner for social services and ran the state social service agency, which included all of the welfare, child care programs aging programs that the state operates. And at the end of Weicker's term...
You were running this?
Yes, I was running this.
That's very interesting. We want to talk about that.
Yes.
Mr. Weicker, but go ahead.
I ran a $3 billion agency and over 3,000 staff.
Wow.
And when Mr. Weicker decided that he wasn't going to seek re-election, and his then lieutenant governor decided to run for governor, they asked me to run for lieutenant governor.
That would be, again, on an independent ticket, as Mr. Weicker had been, right.
That the party that was created by Weicker, called A Connecticut Party, I agreed, and so I just finished a run for lieutenant governor. Started just about a year ago. And that, too, was a very exciting time. Learned a lot about politics, but also learned quite a bit about the mood of the country and some of the things and feelings that people were having. And I think that has helped me as I've moved into this position now as the Executive Vice President of National Urban League.
I should have thought it would. And also to be with Mr. Weicker, who is an interesting person in and of himself, ran independently.
That's right.
And took some pretty courageous steps as far as putting Connecticut's affairs in order, and is positioning himself now, as you and I talk, in a very interesting way in terms of national politics.
That's right.
But he was a pretty interesting man worth talking here in this tri-state area. His new book out called Maverick, and I think that represents him very well. He inherited a significant budget deficit in the state. When we walked in initially, we thought the budget deficit was bad, but wasn't too bad. But after we really looked at the books and all the smoke and mirrors that were used, it became very apparent that we had a significant problem, and one that, even though he ran opposed to an income tax, as a matter of fact, he used the term that it's like throwing oil on a fire to have to propose an income tax. He got into the position and looked around, and it was the only viable alternative unless you were going to pretty much shut all of the state services down. That was a pretty gutsy position to take at that time.
Very gutsy position. Very gutsy position, and it was one that many legislators in the state who supported that were unseated as a result of their support 4 years later.
And Mr. Florio in New Jersey had difficulties.
For the income tax. But Weicker, it was the first, it had been proposed many other times in Connecticut, but never was anyone able to get it passed. And I think only someone with his personality could have gotten that income tax passed, and it did exactly what he said it was going to do. People were afraid that what we would do is get this new revenue, and so we'd expand government and expand services, and so you'd have an income tax forever. Tax and spend. That was all they could see. And clearly what they recognized was that we passed an income tax and we kept it at a level that we knew we needed the revenue, but not at a level that would be a real hardship on all of the citizens in the state.
That's a very interesting balancing act.
It was an interesting balance, but we also reduced services significantly.
Now, you were in charge of a lot of services in that state, so you had to be walking that line pretty carefully yourself, because you were advocating for government services in the names of the children and some of the people who needed services, and you had to be sure that that didn't get all out of hand.
I had to be sure that it didn't get out of hand, but I also had to be sure that where we could streamline services, programs, that we did that. Where we could reduce staff, that we did that. And also try and understand, I mean, in Connecticut, one of the things that was real interesting was that our welfare budget was not driven by kids and moms. Our welfare budget was driven by services to our seniors, and particularly our seniors who were living in nursing homes.
Interesting.
So that when you looked at the budget and where the dollars were going, just in the welfare budget alone, we were spending somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.2 million on welfare services in our Medicaid, in our the health side of the budget. And 800,000+ of that was going to nursing homes.
I'll be darned.
So you weren't talking about a large expenditure to kids and families for health care, and the same in terms of cash benefits. The difference, the percentage difference, the lion's share of our budget, and helping the public understand that and to come to grips with that, and then to realize that we had to do some things to try and slow down
Is that characteristic
growth.
of the nation, or was that unique to Connecticut?
No, I think it's characteristic of many states in the nation where in their Medicaid expenditures, a significant portion of that expenditure is going to pay for individuals who are in nursing homes. Not that we should not be doing that, but it's just that it needs to be clear because moms and kids and single adults take the brunt
of the criticism.
And that's really in our case. And so, and I had to propose some things that streamline. Here in New York, it's called the your home relief programs. I had to streamline our home relief programs, reduce spending to certain populations, those kinds of changes. But we also made it very clear that while we did that, we were not going to eliminate that, quote, safety net.
Well, that's exactly the careful line that has to be walked nationally in this country now. And you walked it and talked it and walked it and did it in Connecticut, and it came out.
It came out fine.
Successfully.
It came out successfully. We balanced the budget in the first year. Actually, we had a slight surplus.
Amazing.
And for the next 2 years, we kept a very balanced budget, and we're slowly, because we were balancing the budget and our revenues were starting to exceed our expenditures, you were able to then look at what are the services we can expand, and our expansion, because the governor was very committed to kids, our expansion was in the coverage of children's health. So new spending that we made was in the area of school-based health clinics and in the area of expanding Medicaid coverage for kids.
So things got covered,
Yes, they got covered, and he had the ability to advocate in the legislature very strongly for the protection of children, the maintenance of a safety net. We were not talking about leaving systems the way they were. We knew there were abuses, those kinds of things. We had to eliminate those kinds of those program areas and take those steps. But by and large, I think we did both a progressive welfare reform strategy, which I had responsibility for devising, as well as a one that promoted responsibility in work.
And responsibility for the economy.
And responsibility for the economy. That's right.
And do you think he was able to do something, just a last note here in a sense, but he was able to have a unique position being an independent?
Oh, I think so.
And not being tied to the past and not being tied to the political parties? It's difficult.
It was very hard, but it was very clear. You could talk to people on both sides of the aisle.
Right.
And you could forge coalitions.
Well, that's interesting.
Around, and some coalitions worked around certain areas and others around other areas. You didn't have always the same people with
you weren't necessarily locked into the doctrine of either right or left, as it were, in a certain sense. And it may not be entirely inappropriate as we come up to a presidential election in 1996.
Well, I suspect that's why Mr. Weicker is exploring and testing the waters.
A toe or two in the water anyway, and a lot of other people have, and it also reflects the national consciousness. So you've had all this experience in Connecticut. You also had Washington experience.
In Washington, D.C., I had a similar role as Commissioner for Social Services.
Right.
But in that capacity, also had responsibility for child welfare, which here in New York, as you know, is a major program that is constantly under scrutiny and criticism.
And then one last thing personally, right, is you went to the Kennedy School as well. A number of people have come out of that. That's a pretty good testing ground or training ground for public policy advocacy positions.
It's an excellent training ground. And what is good about it is you don't just learn theory, but you learn practice. You use a case study method and really look at how people address particular kinds of problems using the theory that you were learning. And you begin to apply it in real life situations as opposed to what quite often I see happening is that folks come out and they understand all the principles and all the theories and all the diagrams and everything that they need to do.
What the heck happens in real life?
They walk into a union meeting and completely
What's
lost.
this all about?
What's this all about?
What happened to all the theories? Well,
right.
anyway, you've been well trained, you're well positioned. I congratulate you on all of that, and I particularly congratulate you on being here on the program, because I think that's, I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about that, about, among other things that are your charge. You have a great deal of responsibility, administrative and so forth, for a major institution, but you're particularly concerned with welfare.
That's right.
Welfare reform
That's
and
right.
welfare developments,
That's right.
and that's a real hot issue in
That's
this
correct.
country now. And I wonder, how do you see it? How do you think of it? We have had since, let me just sort of frame it a little bit here. We had a man named Franklin Roosevelt, and we began to establish what we called a New Deal, and we established some principles called a safety net, and we had a notion of, in a broader world sweep of things, welfare state notions, the idea of a certain standard that we want to vouchsafe for all of our citizens, very often in the name of need and so forth. Then we had an election in 1994 where there seemed to be a reaction of the angst of the people of the country. There had been one in 1992 which reflected the same. But this one in 1994, Mr. Gingrich and the Republicans have captured the 103rd Congress, and now there's this tidal wave that is really having a major effect in this country. And there's some people who say that Mr. Gingrich and company would like to, if it were possible, to go back pre-Franklin Roosevelt and to try to abolish everything that was done after 1932.
I don't doubt.
You know? And I just wonder, where does it stand? How bad is it? What is the situation? And what are the major areas of concern that you have with your responsible position in terms of welfare and welfare reform and the concept of workfare? And how can we establish a responsible social policy?
Let me say from the outset, I believe that the welfare system was not working. It was rewarding all the wrong sets of values.
Okay.
You were penalized if you worked. You were penalized if you tried to get married. You were penalized if you tried to do all of the things that we say we want people to do because of the way it was constructed. And that was a real concern that many of us had. Let me give you an example. If you went to work, as soon as you went to work, you had some income that would be disregarded. They'd figure, okay, you need to get started. But that was only for 3 or 4 months.
Right.
At the end of that period,
Lose all your
you would
benefits.
start losing all your benefits, and particularly your medical. So you have a mom who may have 2 or 3 children who have serious medical problems. The kinds of jobs that they would get would not provide the kind of medical coverage that they needed, or may prevent them from paying for pre-existing conditions, or whatever the needs were. What sense did it make for you to jeopardize the health of your children and yourself and not to have enough income to even meet your basic needs if you went to work?
Absolutely.
So and a lot of those policies were created at the time for the right reason, but we didn't review them and we didn't keep up with the changing of times, the changing needs, et cetera. So we needed to go back and re-look at it. And but in re-looking at it, unfortunately, what people started doing, and Gingrich and his folk and many around the country, was blaming the victims for the problem of the system.
Sure seems that way.
And saying, well, the reason...
I mean, to my way, that's the way they're doing. That's what they're doing.
The reason people don't want to go to work is because they're lazy.
Yeah, right.
And because they can get this income.
Yeah.
They can get more income if they have more children.
Right.
All of the stereotypes that I myself, at one point, worked for the National Welfare Rights Organization in the early 70s. All the stereotypes that we fought then were now being promoted again and again and again and again through talk shows, and everywhere you went, people were talking about those terrible people on welfare.
Can I ask you a question right out here in the middle of all this without interrupting your train of thought? And can you come back and pick it up, all right, so there's no big problem or anything like that and everything? How come it is? How come it is that they will talk about people like that, but the people who are, let's say that 43% of capital assets are owned by 1/2 of 1% in this country, 5% own virtually all of them, and they've got coupons they clip at the end of each month, and they get money because they coupon that, and they don't do any work. They don't have a job, and yet they're getting the money, and nobody ever complains about that.
That's right.
Why is that?
Well, I can only guess that those individuals also have the
You know what I'm saying?
I know exactly what you're saying, but they also have the resources to pay for lawyers and lobbyists and groups and others to protect their interest. They have greater ability to protect their interests than poor people do.
But it doesn't seem to bother us that they don't work.
They don't work. It doesn't bother us that they don't work.
Because they have income. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Okay,
They've got income.
Go back to the running.
But our folk who have no income, and in some cases it's not through any fault of their own.
Absolutely.
I mean, many of the women, I have administered welfare programs for 15 years.
Right.
And many of the women that I have talked to have come into this system not because they wanted to come into the system, but they looked up and found that promises that had been made had not been kept.
Right.
People that they thought loved them really didn't love them.
Right.
Arrangements, marriages, everything failed, and they were finding themselves now needing some help. Welfare was created to be temporary assistance.
Right.
The average length of time in which somebody is on assistance is a little over 2 years. In Connecticut, it was 2.3, 2.4 years.
Right.
So you're not talking about people who make a way of life. What does happen is that people come into welfare after that couple of years. The children are older, they've gotten some skills, they manage to go out and get a job, they start working. Something happens. Their housing goes up, they become ill, the child becomes ill, etc. They fall right back into the system. It's sort of, some people are episodic. They go in and out of the system several times until they can finally get themselves on their feet.
Right.
But what you had was people going around. I mean, I would have people come up to me, both when I was commissioner and running for office, just lambasting me about these terrible, shiftless, lazy people who were on assistance, and convinced that the reason teen pregnancy exists is because teenagers know that they can have children and the government can pay for it.
Right.
Nobody ever bothered to raise the question, well, what are the options that we're ensuring that young people have so that having a child is not viewed as something that that they do in order to make themselves feel important or feel like they're a young woman or an adult and have somebody to love. What are we doing about pregnancy prevention programs? What are we doing about education? I mean, there are a lot of those kinds of issues. But so welfare is sort of now taking the brunt of all the other failed systems.
That's right. They'll take, and there are a lot of failing systems all over the place. I mean,
over the place.
You've got corporations downsizing. I mean, you've got people laying off by the tens and hundreds of thousands and so forth. And government too downsizing. I mean, you used to have people who do that, and you've got that kind of thing going on. The largest employer now in the country is now a temp.
That's right.
Temp employee. I mean, it's not like you have these long-term obligations. I mean, that doesn't carry any health benefits or any of the other kinds of things. No child care needed. So the world is in a very much more flux situation, and long-term solid jobs that we tended to think of coming out of the Second War and so forth are simply not being provided by the economy in its inexorable development. Are they? Am I not correct?
You're absolutely correct. And the people who are on the bottom are even feeling that pressure much greater than the rest of us, although we all feel. And I think that's also part of the reason there is such a sort of a visceral response from the public as it relates to people on welfare. We're all hurting.
There's
people
angst
are concerned.
There's angst, and it's at all levels.
That's right. And unfortunately, we're developing public policy based on those sets of emotions and reactions to information that is incorrect. And what it's going to mean in the long run is that we are going to create a new program. We're going to eliminate the entitlement. So we're going to eliminate the safety net, which is
very scary.
It's very, very scary. There is no longer that guarantee that if you need help, you're going to receive help
Yeah,
in both bills that
Yeah.
are now going before the
Yeah.
through the Congress.
Yeah, that general principle that we can distribute some of the wealth of the country on the basis of the person's need.
That is all good.
That principle is being attacked.
That's right.
And in its place is going to be some ethic, Protestant or otherwise ethic, that the distribution of income will become only based upon a person's contribution to production? Or what is going to be
it's
the
going to be
basis
based
of
on
the...
50 different interpretations of how you want to provide that assistance.
Is it wise for a society to so cavalierly undercut distributing some income to some of our people on the basis of need?
All we're going to do is shift our costs.
Right.
We're going to shift our costs from this program, and it's going to reappear somewhere else, because people are going to still have to have adequate housing,
Absolutely.
adequate food on the table,
Absolutely.
adequate health care, and we're going to need to provide it, because as a society we still want to do that.
And we can't put all our money into building prisons now, can we? Although we seem to be trying to do that in many cases, where we build more and more prisons and more incarcerating things.
Right.
And instead of you know what I'm saying, right?
Well, you're absolutely right.
And it's building to social pressures and social disequilibriums that could become very, very dangerous. So is that principle there? Then the idea, am I correct in identifying it that since the New Deal, or the idea that there should be distribution of income, and the whole concept of the safety net is that we will distribute income via government intervention into the market process according to a person's need, and that this is a principle that we should be very, very careful in so cavalierly abandoning as a society.
Absolutely.
Do you think we're addressing that question adequately
I don't
in the
think
public discussion or dialogue?
I don't think we're addressing that question adequately in the public dialogue. I think information is being shared on what the impact of that could mean. But again, it's not getting into the discussions in the media. We're not having the dialogue around that issue. We're still stuck over here about wanting to do something about these people. And if it means that we do away with a right that we have made available that is extremely important as we talk about meeting the needs of the poor, if we eliminate that, if that's what it means that we need to do, so be it. And I don't think people realize what that is going to mean in the long term. The other part of this debate is, while we're talking about eliminating safety nets in 2 years and then you're out, and cashing out your food stamps and giving all of this flexibility to the states, which is, if I was a state commissioner, I wanted more flexibility. States can't absorb the flexibility that they're talking about.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
It is impossible. The GAO has already said this to the Congress. You're about to hand over to the state a set of responsibilities that they are ill-equipped to expand, to be able to absorb in the time frame and in the manner that people won't be hurt.
So that means that people in real need are going to hurt.
People in real need are going to be hurt.
Right.
The other thing that we haven't done with this, and this is part of what the Urban League has been so concerned about, is while we talk about behavior modification and that side of the equation of getting people, if we change these policies and there won't be any additional children.
Again, blaming the victim.
All of the blame. We're not on the other side saying, okay, now where are the jobs and how do we ensure that the employment opportunities that are necessary for people to go to work are going to exist, and will these employment opportunities have adequate health care, minimal health care, child care. Will they provide a wage that will allow someone to pay for housing? We're not talking basic housing. It means, how do we ensure that there is an employment strategy that is a part of this? That debate is not being held at the same time with our discussions on welfare reform.
Well, I think you're in deep trouble if you don't, in the system's way, take that into account. If the economy is failing, and the private economy is failing to provide for the citizens of the society as a whole, there's a civic responsibility and a public responsibility to make sure that the overall society does cover the needs of the people who, after all, make up the society, don't you think? And here we get, again, this downsizing business, I think, is no small measure. I mean, since 1973, productivity gains have no longer, for the mass, I mean, there's probably 20, 30% doing very well in our society, something like that. But since 73, as productivity has gone up, there was a piece in the Times last week, productivity goes up, but the wage level stagnated and they're starting to go down.
That's right.
It used to be you'd get a house, everybody would get a house. One wage earner could make a house. You'd buy a house. Now it's becoming something that's beyond the... So the trends are in the wrong direction.
The trends are in the wrong
that the
direction.
private economy is doing. And the technology is coming and being able to displace people increasingly at all levels of production.
That's correct.
And the technology is all owned by that 5% of the population who owns all the capital, who clips the coupons, who nobody complains about. And do you see, it seems like we have a real dilemma there.
We have a very real dilemma.
Do we address that part of the question audibly, the ownership of the capital side of the production equation?
But we've never addressed that side.
But why? Why haven't we? That's what I asked you earlier. Why don't we address that question? I don't really have a good answer to that, to be honest. It's pretty basic as the technology becomes more and more responsible for production.
I think many of us have talked about the need to redistribute the wealth in this country. We have talked about the need to have a movement for economic justice. How do we ensure that those individuals, that small percentage at the top, pay their fair share of the taxes that are necessary and pay their fair share of what it takes to run and operate this country and these communities? Or
maybe, Audrey, it might be that, we have this concept of democracy, which is, participate, and there are people wanting to, we have a what do you call it, a representative democracy, but we have the idea of but we have an economic plutocracy in terms of the ownership of the capital, and the capital is more and more responsible for the actual, in Tom Jefferson's time, there was very little capital asset. I mean, a guy would have a hammer, but then he'd make shoes. It took a long time. But now, Sara Lee, they turn out all these things that you can't eat. They're so good. They're really good, but you can't eat them because of cholesterol. They turn them up, and no human hand touches them. It's all done by computers and technology, and somebody owns that. And we don't have an economic democracy of the ownership of that which is actually responsible for the production. And we ask 95% of the population who have no ownership to get their income from a job which is less and less contributing to the overall production. I think we're in denial about the technological realities of the productive process. Do we not have to address that question at some point? Or can we do it all by the Employment Act of 1946 and the traditional system of trying to develop a job, a high-pay, high-skilled job like Mr. Reich says, or Mr. Gingrich says, entrepreneurially? Can we do it in the traditional pattern, or do we need some new vision or something?
We need some new vision.
You think so?
I'm clear. We can't, the populations, we're not going to, we don't have the resources to train the individuals who need the training to be able to master the skills that are necessary for them to get those high-tech jobs. That is a major infusion of resources.
There's going to be fewer and fewer of those jobs.
And there are going to be fewer and fewer of those jobs. So that what we need to start looking at is where and how do we create, or what is the new job of the future? How do we begin to identify the new employment opportunities that are going to exist in the future, and then what is it going to take to prepare people for those jobs? Okay,
well, that's important. That's good. If we can get the jobs, but what I'm trying to say is that it may be that we're on an inevitable course where, like Aristotle used to say that in Athens and Periclean Greece was built on a slave system. They had some people at the, Socrates used to sit around and talk philosophy, but they had a slave class. And Aristotle said they will need to have slaves in order for some to live a civilized life until the loom learns to weave, at which time then maybe they could have a democratization of the process of, where you could pass it over onto the machines. And the Industrial Revolution, in a certain sense, has taken over so much more of the production of goods and services, and now we move into an information environment. I wonder if we don't have to have some sort of a pattern of our infrastructure's falling apart. There's capital shortfalls on all sides as you look around, and yet the we need to have an increased capital formation capability, but we need to spread the ownership of that so that, like a business investment, you make an investment, it will in a reasonable period of time pay for itself out of its future earnings. That applies nicely to those who already have a capital portfolio or an estate, but we don't apply that principle to the general society where they begin to build an ownership in the technology which is creating the wealth. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying.
So you can't distribute income by labor or by jobs alone. You have to begin to democratize capital asset-ability or something to the people, and people have to start addressing that issue of, can't we, in a private property, market economy, vouchsafe private property, answer social problems by allowing more and more people to have ownership so that they could have income coming from them from the way in which things are actually being produced, and be able to perhaps allow for greater leisure and third sector activities or voluntary activities that could be done by human beings who have the wherewithal to live free lives. If you understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying. And there are some small attempts to do that as I travel around the country and start to look at what is happening in some communities. What comes to mind immediately is the Shore Bank Corporation that is in Chicago.
It's community bank.
And community bank.
Right,
and some of the things that it's starting to do in the Austin community.
And we've got one in Brooklyn.
And you have one in Brooklyn that they're starting. They're moving in Detroit.
Right.
Those are kinds of issues that they're trying to look at and think about as they go into various communities. We need to create, and we're going to need to lift up those approaches and try and get them to either a level of scale or a level so that the public policy discussion that can we
them.
That's right. Can we now redefine the dialogue around these sorts of approaches that will allow us to do a better job and to or actually redesign how we think about jobs, employment, wealth distribution in this country.
Right. Well, we've had this traditional thing happen. We have tax and spend. One people will say the Democrats and the liberals all want to tax and spend in the name of government. The critics of the right wing will say, well, that they're going to just trickle down a little bit. That's going to come trickling down. Both of those two systems seem not to be working at the moment.
No, and those of us in the middle,
Mr. Weicker being one,
those of us in the middle who have been trying to take a different approach to this, we've got to do a better job. Everybody's now talking about doing a better job of telling their story, of selling their approach. We've got to do a better job of education, information, sharing, because the only two sides that you hear are the two extremes.
Well, the two sides. But if I may also, Audrey, it seems to me that collectively we as a society, the vision thing, Mr. Bush didn't want to talk much about the vision thing, but it might be that we need some enunciated policy that is not being enunciated as a new vision. I mean, there's argumentation of the two sides, but something that's going to be able, like, if you're coming from the right or the left, I mean, if you could have something like that would vouchsafe private property, I mean, that's something that people on the right want to see. If you want equity, they have these things, ESOPs, employee stock ownership plans. They begin to build ownership of the workers into that. That could be expanded out into the general society, perhaps more than it has been, into some sort of a new system of that begins to get past the idea that all distribution of income is going to be done by employment. As these robots come and turn out incredible amounts of production that we could realize if we had systems that allowed us to do what technologically we're capable of doing. Do you understand what I'm saying?
No, I understand what you're saying. But I do think that there are, they're small. But like the ESOPs, like SURE, like some of the community economic development that is going on in various communities, whether it's through community development corporations or some new ways of thinking about how do we create an employment, well, not really an employment, how do we create
See, we immediately go
economic,
to employment.
That's right, how do we create economic opportunities?
Yeah, economic opportunity doesn't necessarily have to be only employment.
But we think about it.
We do traditionally. Well, we have the Employment Act of 1946, our basic grounding policy statement that we will distribute everything according to, well, that's nice, particularly for those people who own it all. I mean, it's very nice for us not to be thinking about how come we can't have more of an economic democracy. You know, and it may be the conditions are forcing us to look at that and maybe move beyond the Employment Act of 46 and beyond the concept of productivity itself, and maybe to something called production. But in the meanwhile, we have immediate problems for immediate people.
That's right.
And one of them is, for someone like yourself, is this broadside attack upon entitlements is something that ought to really be, entitlements should be seen as entitlements, and they shouldn't be, and kept that way. And that's a very important principle that I think you're ready to go to the wall
that's
about,
a
right?
critical, well, we are. I mean, our Washington office is part of all of the coalitions and groups that are working down there to try and educate our elected leadership on the importance and what it's going to mean. I mean, one of the things that you find in this, we did a forum a few weeks ago on welfare reform, brought in a number of experts to look at the jobs, the employment opportunities, how does all of this work, can we create, since we're talking immediate 2 years and you're out, so that there's got to be something that you can have at the end of that 2 years. How do we start thinking about all of those issues? And one of the things that struck all of us is that all of these were people who have been researching, operating, thinking about these issues for a very, very long time, not in the last year when they ran for office and now since they've been elected. And everything that we were advocating is very different than everything that is being talked about in Congress. And it's very scary because it says that what we may end up with is a set of public policies and an approach that is going to not only hurt people directly,
the most vulnerable people,
but all the rest of us are going to be affected by ill-advised and ill-thought-out changes and the inability of state and local governments to fill the gap. And what you are going to start to see is a race to the bottom. I mean, New York, Connecticut, and that whole East Coast line. If Massachusetts reduces its benefits and takes some, we're going to go lower. And if Connecticut goes lower, New York is going to, because we don't want people crossing backwards and forth across our borders.
This is going to hurt
So you're going to
people.
have a race to the bottom. And people are going to be hurt.
That's right.
And then it's going to cost us more.
With prisons, if nothing else.
With prisons
Not
and with
to
other
mention
systems.
paramilitary, whatever you might
We're
be able
not
to
going
get
to stand
to.
any more people on the streets.
Right.
We're not going to stand for seeing children on the streets all day and all night. We're going to want government responses. We're going to want systems to respond. And so we're going to start spending money in crisis. Crisis costs more.
Absolutely.
If you take a moment and really plan out how we need to approach this and how we need to change this.
Costs more to put a man in prison than it does to put him through Harvard, I believe.
That is exactly correct.
It's absurd. It's absurd
that exactly
we pay it on the long end rather than do investment on the front end and like that. And we have this problem. You think we're in a crisis mode now over this welfare thing? And I wonder if we look at it, Mr. Clinton seems to be all in favor of welfare reform. I mean, he's over to what, in a certain sense, from the traditional view of the left, let's just say, or the Democratic Party has been associated, seems to be over to the right of center on that question. And there seems to be general agreement on the need for this work ethic thing.
Well,
and they're all trying to say that, and I just wonder if that is not, in a little bit of a sense, you started out saying blaming the victim, but you've got this broader technological developments that are going on, these things that are going on, and it's affecting all levels of society increasingly, even people in the middle class, upper middle, even some of the lower rungs of the upper. Gloria Vanderbilt's got trouble for crying out loud. It's beginning to, it's beginning to affect them, and that if it's not a little bit of a scapegoating of the people for an inexorable development of that we've not yet been able to come up with a solution to, that we may be heading for a two-tiered society, and we may be heading for a real social and political chaos that it really is incumbent upon us to try to stave off. Do you think we're in a crisis mode?
Well,
if that maybe overworked term.
I'm not so sure it's crisis. I think we're, even though the economy is getting better, I mean, so we see. I mean, if you look at some of the data, it seems to give some indication that things go up. We keep going up and down. We're not in a recession. It's not as a smooth increase as we'd like. It's up and down, and it has its, it ebbs and flows.
But it's left too many people behind.
But that's the problem. It's left too many people behind. Those people are angry. They see that they're not going to be able to catch up. They're not going to be able to recoup what they had before they faced all of this.
And even a lot of the people who are successful are feeling uncertain about things. They're looking down the hole. My next.
It can disappear at any moment.
Yeah, right.
There are no our security is gone.
Right. Well,
our security is gone.
That's part of a firm sense of identity that the angst is reflected politically.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so what I think we're doing is we're now knee-jerk reacting to trying to figure out what do we do, and both political parties are knee-jerk reacting, trying to figure out, is there anything we can do to sort of make that feel better?
Right.
And everybody's sort of responding to what they think the public wants to hear or needs to hear or needs to feel.
And the public isn't always sure exactly what they want to hear. They just know they're uncomfortable.
That's right.
And they're uncomfortable, and they don't like it the way it is. And we haven't even talked on the deficit yet.
That's right.
The deficit is there, coming up 15% of
and I don't care how
the budget.
And so if you're trying to develop domestic policies, let's just say, in that kind of an environment, we have never, as a government, been very comprehensive in our thinking.
Right, systems.
Here's this problem, let's resolve this problem. Here's this problem, let's resolve. And there is a direct relationship between the two problems, and you need to bring that together and think about them in terms of how do you respond systematically.
Right, as a system.
We don't do that.
We don't do enough of that?
We don't do enough of that.
Right.
And as a result, as I said earlier, you've got welfare reform policy going down this direction, employment and training policy going down this direction, and both are talking about workforce development.
Right. Yeah.
But neither are talking to each other about who, on what workforce you're talking about.
And what the implications of one on the other is.
And what the implications on one on the other are.
We should be learning from it. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, and it isn't something, as I said, I've been in this business. I started in the 70s. I went through the Nixon Family Assistance Plan in 72. I went through the changes in 76.
Did you go through the ad hoc committee on the Triple Revolution, or is that you're too young for that? You're too young for that, right? Well, that goes back, okay, right.
But the changes that we made, that Moynihan was very much, the family assistance changes of 1988. I mean, so there have been all of these changes that we've made in these domestic policies. And I'm convinced that those of us who are continually saying, hey, folks, you all have got to start looking at this picture through a different lens and no longer worry about your turf, your area, but begin to look at what business is talking about, the customer,
or
the consumer, and start looking at public policy from that perspective as opposed to from the party perspective. What is the best interest of the party politic? What is in the best interest of the community?
Right.
I mean, we sometimes forget that whole neighborhoods exist, and in those neighborhoods there are a range of amenities. There are a range of family needs and we need to have our policies take all of that and understand that and take it into account.
That's right. We should have a systems overview. We should learn from ecology. I mean, like DNA shows us that all the bodies of a cell the cells of a body are linked into a system, and you can't have a few cells doing real well over here and a bunch of them not working because that's cancer. And you really have to have an overview systems view of it, and it begins to be where you need, it seems to me it's a vision thing that is needed, but I still look for where it's going to come from, because I don't see it within the traditional political or the political dialogue. And I'm going to have to use the term again for people who view the program. I'm really sorry, to use it, but I'll use it because it's so apt. from a certain sense, but James Joyce had Daedalus say, history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. And I still don't see the alarm clock of awakening from the traditional patterns which seem to be putting us in, for too many people on a world scale, and particularly the most vulnerable people, putting them into an increasingly vulnerable position that we may in a stopgap way been able to answer, but you know, we don't have that vision. But you know, it just seems that way to me. How far back we can go by reneging on the welfare, by going back to how far back can we go and allow the market to just take over? Should we, maybe they used to have child labor. Maybe we should bring back child labor and put the little kiddies to work at mills, and you know, we could put that to.
Maybe very many mills.
And maybe we could get rid of when did the women start voting? And you know, and public libraries. Why don't we close down all these public libraries and let the market take it? I mean, the market can't do all of these things and that kind of thing, but they can do more. But there's a change that is needed. You know what I'm saying? Are you optimistic we're going to come to some solutions here as you begin?
I think I'm an internal optimist. Huh? I really think that we have faced difficulties and dilemmas like this before, and as a nation, we have opened our eyes, opened our ears, said, wait a minute, this is not the way in which we want to take care of the least among us. It certainly is not the way we want to see our children have to live and what they will have to face if we make all these changes. And I think what we will begin to see is a groundswell of public opinion that will say, well, wait a minute, we wanted you to fix this, but we did not want to penalize the people who need it. And I am just, if it doesn't happen... Yeah,
as they begin to see what the real costs of some of these things are.
Because there's some real costs associated with this.
Right.
And I just can't believe, I have a little more faith that the public will, in looking at this and starting to see what the impact really is, will express its displeasure.
Yep.
And will come around. I think it's on those kinds of issues. The other thing, though,
that's particularly on this Gingrich thing.
On Gingrich, but even on the bigger sets of issues. I mean, those of us who believe that we need to make some fundamental change in the economic justice in this country, we need to make some fundamental change in the way our political systems operate, we need to make some fundamental change, are going to have to step forward. We can't sit back and watch this show and say, yeah, they're right.
No, you got to come up with some. I got a friend of mine who got to come up with some questions and some answers, something new. I don't know, Lord Keynes and you know, these other people, or you know, something beyond the traditional thing. And I had a friend of mine who sees some of these questions. He said they ought to take all the leaders and they ought to lock them in a room, and they ought not to let them come out of that room until they've come up with the vision that's going to get us past this new condition that's emerging, sort of like selecting the Pope or something. But you know, they just haven't come up with it in the normal dialogue that we hear in the press and in the normal.
But it's not going to come from those folks. It's not going. I firmly believe it is not going to come from our elected leaders and those folk who are out there. It's going to come from us. It's going to come from us in small, you know, taking, developing new approaches, taking some risks. Coming forward in very small, maybe through neighborhoods or communities, beginning to try some different approaches to how we live. It really is going to come from us.
Well, it's going to take that, people who've had some experience of that, like yourself, I may say so, and Mr. Weicker, if I may say so, and also, you know, and here, and cable television, if we may say so as well. It might get some ideas there. But Audrey, thank you very much for coming in. And I really have enjoyed talking with you. Great. And I would remind you, in the cable audience, it's been your pleasure, the perceptions of Audrey Rowe. She again is newly appointed in a relatively short-term sense as the Executive Vice President, #2 in charge of the National Urban League, working with Hugh Price, and I wish you all the very best as you probe these issues and present them, and happy to have been able to share them, some thoughts with you here. We on Conversations invite you. We'll be coming back again next week. That's it for this particular segment. Audrey, once again, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
Until next time. Okay, so covered a lot of bases and that sort of thing. I got a little thing, I'll give you a little piece of paper, I'll give you about that other, and maybe we could be in touch with one another, because I'm in New York and that. But I'm particularly interested in this this issue, this ownership issue,
Yeah.
you know. I just don't see it being mentioned, you know. I just, you know, I don't know why they shy away.
There is a group, and I was trying to think of the name of it, some material that came across my desk not too long ago that was starting to, I guess they had a press conference in Washington,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm trying to think of what the group is called, but they're starting to put some dialogue.
Well, I might, if you want, I don't know if you're interested in it, but I'd recommend the book to you, that one I recommend. Well, there's that one, there's one called by you know Rifkin.
I know Jeremy.
Jeremy. You know him personally?
Yeah.
He comes out with some strange things, but, I mean, he's a smart fellow. I love the entropy.
Okay, that's a wrap.
Okay. And then there's one called The Jobless Society, The
Now, I
Jobless
haven't-
Future, that
haven't
Stanley
seen-
Aronowitz